In this episode, we move from broad principles into one of the most practical parts of artificial intelligence, AI governance, and that is figuring out who is supposed to do what when an organization builds, buys, approves, deploys, monitors, or limits an AI system. New learners often assume governance means a company has a policy somewhere and maybe a committee that meets from time to time, but that picture is far too vague to guide real decisions. When something important happens with AI, such as choosing a use case, approving data, accepting risk, reviewing privacy concerns, handling a vendor, or responding to a harmful outcome, somebody has to own that decision and somebody else has to support, review, or challenge it. If those roles are fuzzy, the organization starts drifting into unsafe habits very quickly. People assume another team already checked the issue, leaders think the technical group has it covered, and technical staff think legal or risk leaders will step in if anything serious appears. Strong governance begins when that confusion is replaced with clear roles, clear authority, and clear accountability across the life cycle. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is understanding that roles are not the same thing as job titles, and ownership is not the same thing as involvement. Many people may touch the same AI project, but that does not mean they all own the same decisions. A software engineer may build part of the system. A privacy professional may review a data issue. A security team may assess exposure, and a business leader may approve the use case. Yet each of those actions belongs to a different layer of responsibility. Beginners sometimes hear that governance should be cross-functional and then imagine that everyone shares ownership equally. In reality, cross-functional governance works best when it creates clarity rather than diffusion. Different people contribute different expertise, but important decisions still need specific owners. When ownership is spread so widely that nobody can be named, the organization usually discovers too late that it had many participants but no real decision maker for the questions that mattered most. Another distinction that helps is the difference between doing work, advising on work, and being accountable for outcomes. A team can do a great deal of labor around an AI system without being the final owner of whether that system should be used in a particular context. Imagine a customer service tool that summarizes conversations and drafts suggested replies. The technical team may build or configure the tool, but that does not automatically mean the technical team should decide whether it is appropriate to use the tool on sensitive complaints, whether customers need notice, or whether the outputs are reliable enough to shape important responses. Those are governance decisions, not just engineering decisions. The people performing tasks are essential, but governance becomes stronger when the organization asks a sharper question. Who has the authority to approve, pause, change, or stop this use of AI if the risks, obligations, or impacts demand it? That question shifts attention away from activity and toward decision rights, which is where accountability becomes real. At the top of the organization, senior leadership has an important role because it sets direction, tolerance, and expectations for how AI will be used. Leaders do not need to understand every technical detail of every model, but they do need to decide whether the organization is approaching AI aggressively, cautiously, or somewhere in between. They also need to decide what kinds of uses are off-limits, what kinds require elevated review, and what kinds may proceed under normal governance controls. This is where strategy and risk appetite come together. If senior leadership wants the benefits of AI but refuses to assign resources, oversight authority, or reporting expectations, the rest of the governance structure will be weak no matter how thoughtful individual teams may be. Leadership ownership usually includes setting policy direction, endorsing governance structures, resolving conflicts between speed and caution, and ensuring that responsibility for AI is built into the organization rather than treated as a temporary side project driven only by enthusiasm. Many organizations also need a dedicated governance body or cross-functional forum, but beginners should understand what such a group is supposed to do and what it is not supposed to do. A governance committee is not there to write code, approve every minor prompt, or replace day-to-day operational judgment. Its real value is coordination, escalation, consistency, and oversight across the organization. It can review high-risk proposals, harmonize expectations across departments, decide when extra assessment is required, and make sure lessons learned in one area are not lost in another. It can also help prevent a common problem where one business unit approves something in isolation without realizing a similar tool caused concern elsewhere. Even so, the committee itself should not become an excuse for blurry accountability. A governance forum can guide and review, but it still needs clearly defined authority, defined scope, and clear lines back to the leaders and business owners who remain accountable for specific uses. Committees are useful when they organize responsibility, not when they absorb it into endless shared discussion. The business owner of an AI use case is often one of the most important roles in the whole governance model, because this person or function is usually closest to the actual purpose of the system. A business owner should be able to answer basic but essential questions. Why does this system exist? What problem is it meant to solve? Who is affected by it? What outcomes are expected? And what would make the use unacceptable or not worth the risk? This role matters because a technically impressive system can still be a poor governance decision if the business purpose is weak, if the benefit is overstated, or if the organization has not honestly examined the effect on customers, employees, or the public. The business owner should not disappear after initial approval either. Ownership continues through deployment, monitoring, and reevaluation, because the system may be used differently over time than originally intended. When that owner remains engaged, governance is much more likely to stay connected to real-world impact rather than drifting into paperwork. Technical teams have a major role, but their role needs to be defined carefully so organizations do not place either too much or too little responsibility on them. People who design, build, test, configure, or maintain AI systems are responsible for technical quality, documentation, validation, performance monitoring, and communicating limitations honestly. They are often best positioned to explain how the system functions, what data it depends on, where it may be brittle, and what assumptions shape its behavior. That said, technical expertise does not automatically grant sole authority over acceptability, fairness, lawful use, or business appropriateness. A developer may know how to improve model performance, but that does not mean the developer alone should decide whether the tool belongs in hiring, insurance review, or a system affecting vulnerable people. Good governance protects technical staff from being turned into default owners of business ethics and legal exposure simply because they understand the machinery. Their voice is indispensable, but it should sit inside a structure where ownership is shared appropriately across governance, legal, privacy, risk, and business leadership. Data-related roles are just as important because AI systems are shaped by the information used to train, test, prompt, fine-tune, or operate them. Someone has to be responsible for data quality, data suitability, access controls, retention expectations, and the question of whether the organization should be using that information for that purpose at all. In some organizations, this responsibility sits with data stewards, data governance leaders, privacy professionals, or record specialists, and in others it is split across several roles. What matters is not the exact title, but the clarity of the ownership. If nobody is clearly responsible for checking whether sensitive information is entering the system, whether data sources are appropriate, or whether the use of the data matches the organization's obligations and promises, governance becomes dangerously shallow. Students sometimes assume data issues are a technical cleanup matter, but many of the deepest AI governance failures begin when organizations use data too freely, too broadly, or without understanding how those choices affect bias, privacy, trust, and downstream decision quality. Privacy, legal, compliance, and risk functions each bring a different lens, and beginners should avoid collapsing them into one large bucket of control people. Privacy roles focus on how personal data is collected, used, shared, inferred, and retained, and they help determine whether the planned use respects the organization's duties and the expectations of individuals. Legal teams help interpret the laws, contracts, liability issues, and regulatory exposure surrounding a system or use case. Compliance roles care about whether internal policies and external obligations are being followed consistently. Risk functions help the organization identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor the broader consequences of using the system. These roles may overlap at times, but they are not interchangeable. A strong governance model defines where each function leads, where it advises, and when issues must be escalated. Without that clarity, teams often waste time asking the wrong function to answer the wrong question, or worse, they assume that because one group reviewed the tool, every other concern must have been covered as well. Security teams also have a distinct and necessary role, because AI systems can introduce new ways to expose data, weaken controls, or create new attack opportunities if they are introduced carelessly. A security function may review whether a tool is safe to connect to internal systems, whether prompts and outputs could expose confidential information, whether vendor architectures meet organizational expectations, and whether misuse or abuse cases have been considered. Security is not the same as privacy, even though the two are related. A system could protect data well from outside attackers and still violate privacy expectations internally through excessive use or inappropriate inference. In the same way, a privacy review could be thoughtful while the technical environment remains insecure. Governance becomes stronger when security ownership is explicit and connected to the rest of the decision structure rather than bolted on at the last moment. When security teams are involved early enough, they can help shape safer architecture, safer access patterns, safer integration choices, and safer ongoing monitoring instead of being forced into reactive review after the tool is already embedded in business operations. Human oversight roles deserve special attention because many organizations say a human is involved without defining what that involvement really means. A meaningful human reviewer is not someone who passively clicks approve on outputs that the system has already framed as sensible. The reviewer must have enough context, authority, time, and training to notice problems and challenge the system when needed. This is especially important in higher-stakes situations such as employment, benefits, fraud review, healthcare support, identity verification, or access decisions. If a human is named as the oversight control but is not empowered to override the system, escalate concerns, or understand known limitations, then the governance design is weaker than it appears. Ownership here includes deciding when human review is required, who performs it, what standards they use, what documentation they see, and how appeals or corrections are handled when the system may have contributed to a bad outcome. Simply inserting a person into the process is not enough. The role has to be real, defined, and operationally supported. Third-party use creates another layer of role clarity because many organizations will buy or license AI capabilities instead of building everything themselves. A common beginner mistake is to assume that responsibility moves to the vendor once the tool is purchased. Vendors do carry responsibilities for what they build and how they describe it, but the deploying organization still owns the decision to use the tool in its own environment for its own purposes. That means procurement, vendor management, legal review, security review, privacy review, and the business owner all have important parts to play before and after acquisition. Procurement may help structure evaluation and contracting. Legal may examine warranties, representations, liability limits, and use restrictions. Security and privacy teams may assess architecture and data handling. The business owner still has to determine whether the tool is appropriate for the intended use. Good governance treats third-party AI as shared responsibility, not outsourced responsibility. The vendor can inform and support, but the organization cannot hand away accountability for the harms or obligations created by its own deployment decisions. One of the clearest ways to define roles is to tie them to decision points across the AI life cycle rather than trying to assign ownership in one abstract conversation. At the idea stage, someone should own whether the use case is necessary and aligned with strategy. During design and acquisition, someone should own technical suitability, data review, privacy review, legal review, security assessment, and business justification. Before deployment, someone should own final approval, human oversight design, user communication, and conditions for release. After deployment, someone should own monitoring, incident response, complaint handling, performance review, and the decision to retrain, limit, pause, or retire the system. When the organization maps ownership this way, roles become easier to understand because people can see not just what their department does in general, but what decisions they control at specific moments. This approach also helps expose dangerous gaps, such as when a system has a clear launch owner, but no one clearly owns post-deployment monitoring or the authority to suspend use when problems appear. A simple way to reduce confusion is to remember that every important decision should have one clearly accountable owner, even when many people contribute to the decision. Consultation is valuable, and review is essential, but accountability should not be split so widely that nobody can answer for the final call. When several groups believe they jointly own a major decision, it often means that no one truly does. That does not mean one person must act alone. It means the organization should be able to name the owner of the decision, the people who must be consulted, the people who must approve, and the people who need to be informed. This kind of clarity creates better escalation, faster response when something goes wrong, and stronger discipline when teams disagree about acceptable risk. It also helps new employees and non-technical leaders understand the governance model without guessing. When ownership is understandable, governance is easier to follow. When ownership is vague, even a well-written policy can fail in practice because nobody knows who is supposed to turn the policy into action. As you leave this lesson, keep one core idea in mind. AI governance works only when the organization can answer, with specificity, who owns which decisions and who supports, reviews, challenges, or carries them out. Senior leaders set direction and risk tolerance. Governance bodies coordinate and escalate. Business owners justify and remain accountable for use cases. Technical teams manage system quality and limitations. Privacy, legal, risk, compliance, security, and data roles each bring their own oversight responsibilities. Human reviewers must be truly empowered, and vendor use never eliminates internal accountability. Once those roles are clear, decisions become easier to manage across the life cycle because the organization stops relying on assumption and starts relying on defined authority. That clarity is one of the strongest protections any governance program can have, because most serious failures are not caused only by bad technology. Many begin when important decisions are made, delayed, or ignored by people who were never sure whether the decision belonged to them at all.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.